Montjuic, 500 meters. The most explosive finish to the start of the Tour de France in years. Brandon McNulty has just shattered the peloton for the third time on that climb. Of 184 riders, only 40 remain, maybe fewer. Tadej Pogačar is there, calculating. Vingegaard is glued to his wheel. Evenepoel is watching every move. And suddenly, from the chaos, a 22-year-old kid from Ensenada, Mexico, who hours earlier had to rejoin the peloton after a mechanical problem, launches a sprint that no one can touch. He wins. Pogačar, four-time Tour champion, the man who just destroyed the entire Giro d'Italia by more than 6 minutes, finishes second. And not because he couldn't win, because he chose not to. Why would UAE team Emirates let a 22-year-old win the most important stage of the Tour's opening? And what does that decision mean for everything that's to come? His name is Isaac Del Toro, El Torito, the Little Bull. And if that nickname does not make complete sense to you yet, it will by the end of this. Let me tell you what actually happened on stage 2 of this tour, because the result itself was only the surface. The real story was buried inside the chaos of the day. Around 60 kilometers from the finish, Del Toro suffered a mechanical. Not a puncture in clean road conditions, not a quick bike swap in a calm moment. A mechanical in the middle of a stage that was already running hot, where UAE were controlling the tempo and the convoy was moving fast. He was stranded. His team car was not immediately there. He had to work back through a moving convoy on a borrowed wheel, navigate back up to the bunch through traffic and risk and pure raw physical output, and then, once he had rejoined the peloton, spend the remainder of the stage fighting his way back to the front in time for the finale at Montjuic, and then he won. This is just the beginning of the story. That detail matters more than the victory itself. Because winning a stage when everything goes perfectly tells you something about a rider. Winning a stage after a mid-race mechanical chase tells you something completely different. It tells you about the size of the engine, yes, but more importantly, it tells you about the size of the mind. And there is something else in that chase that the TV cameras could not capture. Every kilometre Del Toro spent bridging back to the peloton was a kilometre spent at a higher output than the riders sitting comfortably in the bunch ahead of him. He arrived at the foot of Montjuic having already done work that none of his rivals had done. He then climbed it 3 times and won the sprint. In physiological terms, what he produced in those final kilometres was not just impressive. It was a data point that should make every directeur sportif watching this race deeply uncomfortable about what this rider is capable of when the road actually goes upward into the Alps in 3 weeks' time. Now I want to take you back further, because to understand why Pogačar sat up and gave Del Toro that win, you need to understand what the relationship between those two riders actually represents inside that team, and why it is unlike anything we have seen in professional cycling in a very long time. Isaac Del Toro was born in Ensenada, Baja California, on the 27th of November, 2003. His father was an amateur cyclist who put him on a bike young and let the sport take over from there. He grew up racing mountain bikes, cyclocross, road events, anything with wheels and a finish line. Mexico does not have the cycling infrastructure that Belgium or France or Spain has. It does not have the junior development pathways, the track federations, the talent identification systems that funnel European kids into World Tour teams before they are even 20. Our Monex development squad based in San Marino just to access European racing at all. And even then, the sport nearly took everything from him before he had really started. You're not ready for what's coming. In 2022, Del Toro was at the Tour de l'Avenir, the under-23 race considered the most reliable indicator of Grand Tour potential in world cycling. He crashed. He broke his femur. He damaged an artery. The injury was serious enough that the realistic outcome for most young athletes in that situation is a long rehabilitation and a career that quietly stalls before it finds its real ceiling. Del Toro asked for 1 more year. Just 1 more year to see if the body could come back and the times could hold up. The team gave him that year. What happened next is the reason Pogačar was sitting up on a finishing straight in Barcelona in 2026. Keep watching. It only gets crazier from here. 2023. Del Toro returns to the Tour de l'Avenir, the same race where he had broken his leg 12 months earlier. He does not just race it. He wins it. Not just the overall classification either. He sweeps all 4 jerseys simultaneously, overall, points, mountains, and best young rider, making him the first rider in the history of that race to accomplish that in a single edition. And that clean sweep matters because it signals something that a simple GC win does not. This is not a one-dimensional climber. This is a rider who can sprint at the end of a mountain stage, who accumulates points across different terrain types, who has the tactical intelligence to manage 4 different competitions simultaneously without letting any of them slip. UAE had seen enough. They signed him. By 2025, Del Toro was doing something that no Mexican rider had ever done in the history of professional cycling. He was wearing the pink jersey at the Giro d'Italia. He held it for 11 consecutive days. He became the youngest rider of the 21st century to win a stage while leading a Grand Tour overall. He broke a record for sustained leadership in that race that had stood since Fausto Coppi set it in 1940. And then, on the penultimate day, Simon Yates climbed the Col delle Finestre in a way that nobody in the race could answer, including Del Toro, and the pink jersey was gone. He finished second overall. He was 21 years old. Here is where something important needs to be said, because the way Del Toro reacted to losing that pink jersey is one of the things that makes this story genuinely different from most narratives about young riders. You won't believe what happens next. He did not collapse. He did not show the kind of visible devastation that you might expect from a 21-year-old watching a race lead evaporate on the second to last day of a Grand Tour. He said afterward, with a plainness that felt almost unsettling in its calm, that it hurt, but that it was something that stays with you and teaches you. And then he went straight back to racing. In 2025 alone, he won close to 20 professional races across different countries and terrains. He won Tirreno Adriatico, the Tour de Suisse stage wins, the Tour Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes overall this June, which is the same race that serves as the official warm-up event for the Tour de France itself. He finished 4th in the UCI World Rankings. He was 21 years old for most of that calendar year. The president of Mexico publicly congratulated him. There were celebrations in Ensenada and Mexico City. He was awarded the National Sports Prize. And through all of it, by multiple accounts from people inside UAE Team Emirates, he went home to see his family when he could, trained the way he always had, and showed up to the next race as if the recognition around him was happening to someone else. That is the rider Pogačar chose to ride alongside at this Tour de France. And here is the uncomfortable question that nobody covering this race is asking loudly enough. Is Del Toro here to support Pogačar? Or is Pogačar here to develop Del Toro? Because when the most dominant rider in cycling history sits up inside 500 meters of a Tour de France stage finish to let his 22-year-old teammate take the win, that is not simply a generous team gesture. That is a statement about succession. That is Pogačar, knowingly or not, giving Del Toro something that cannot be bought or trained into a rider. A Tour de France stage win in your debut. A result that goes on record, that becomes part of your story, that riders and directors and future opponents will reference for the rest of your career. Pogačar knows exactly what that gift is worth because he was the last rider to win on debut at this race, in 2020, at 21 years old. Stick around, because the most shocking part is coming up next. Del Toro is now the second Mexican stage winner at the Tour de France in 36 years, since Raúl Alcalá in 1990. In a country where cycling is now experiencing a genuine surge in participation and attention because of what this kid has done over the last 2 seasons, that number carries a weight that goes far beyond sport. And I think it is worth pausing on that for a second because it is easy to reduce this to a sporting milestone and move on. Del Toro grew up in a Mexico where the national cycling team showed up to the UCI Mountain Bike World Championships in 2022 with poor equipment and not enough food. He finished 20th in that race. Second best result from the entire Americas. The infrastructure around him was failing him in real time and he still placed. What that tells you about the raw talent underneath the result is something that no development program in Belgium or the Netherlands would have ever allowed to exist that quietly for that long. The fact that he got from that moment to a Tour de France stage win in 4 years is not just a personal story. It is an argument about how much talent the sport is still missing because of where it chooses to look. But here is the part of this that I think actually matters most for what happens between now and Paris on July the 26th. Stay, because you haven't seen the best part yet. Del Toro is currently sitting 4th in the general classification, 16 seconds behind Vingegaard. Pogačar is 6 seconds back in second. Evenepoel is at 15 seconds. And a 22-year-old Mexican rider who was chasing back through the convoy after a mechanical failure just hours ago is right there in the mix, 16 seconds off yellow at the Tour de France on day 2. The Pyrenees start tomorrow. Stage 3 goes straight into the mountains. Stage 6 crosses the Col du Tourmalet. And then after that come the Alps. Back-to-back summit finishes at Alpe de Huez in stages 19 and 20 at the end of 3 brutal weeks of racing. This is the route where Del Toro's specific physiology, a rider who climbs with an efficient cadence, manages long ascents with intelligent pacing, and can accelerate on mountain finishes when others are already at their limit, becomes either the biggest wildcard in this race or the most important weapon in the UAE arsenal, depending entirely on whether Pogačar stays upright and on form through the mountains. And that is the thing I want to leave you with, because it is the honest version of this story rather than just the exciting one. Del Toro has never raced 3 consecutive weeks at Tour de France intensity before. The Giro in 2025 was his closest reference point, and he led it for 11 days before the penultimate mountain day broke him. The Tour de France is harder. The field is deeper. The pressure on UAE specifically, chasing a record equaling 5th title for Pogačar, is higher than anything Del Toro has operated under previously. The Tourmalet stage is the first real test. If Del Toro is at the front of that race when the road tilts upward in anger, if he is there when Pogačar or Vingegaard decide to make the race hard and the group starts to fracture, then we are not just watching a promising debut. We are watching the beginning of something that the sport has not seen from a Mexican rider in its entire history. 16 seconds. That is all that separates El Torito from the yellow jersey of the Tour de France on day 2 of his debut. If this blew your mind, the next video will blow it even more. Click it now. See you in a second.